Welcome to the Facebook Live event. My name is Greg Ayotte. I'm the Director of Consumer Services for the Brain Injury Association of America. And I'm here today with some members of the Brain Injury Association's Brain Injury Advisory Council to talk about brain injury awareness and understanding. First, a little description, explanation of the council. So the Brain Injury Advisory Council is a group of survivors that works collaboratively to meet the mission of the association. So they work together to increase awareness and understanding about brain injury in many different ways, some kind of just in their own backyards and some kind of collaboratively together. Recently, we've worked to put an article in a recent issue of The Challenge, which you can find. The Challenge is the Brain Injury Association of America's quarterly newsletter. It can be found on the BIAA website. And we also have been putting together some very helpful and practical videos to kind of expand and expound on some of the issues brought up in the article. But first, I thought I'd give a chance for each of you to kind of just introduce yourselves a little bit about your own journey in advocacy and understanding. We'll start with Darcy.
Hi, I'm Darcy Keith. I again based out of Indiana, and a little bit about my background is that I was the only backseat survivor in my fatal car crash back 30 years ago. I've been advocating and been on this journey for over 30 years, learning lessons and tips and things that have allowed me to thrive along the way.
Thank you. Welcome. And we'll move next to Paul.
Hey, Paul Bosworth. Thanks for joining. I'm coming to you from South Louisiana. Had joined the brain injury survivor group as an expanded on September 11, 2007 in a concussion accident while I was by myself. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Lang. I'm from Northern Virginia, and I've been was injured in a car accident along with my daughter back in 2001. So at this for a little over 20 years now, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Happy to have you. And Carol.
I'm Carol Starr, and I'm usually from Maine, but like I said, coming to you from New Hampshire today. And I had a brain injury in a car accident back in 1999. And like many of you probably out there, my injury was considered, quote, mild. Oh, how many of us hate that word mild, because even though I was only unconscious for a few minutes, I still, nearly 23 years later, live with symptoms every day that have upended my life and changed it forever.
Well, thank you all for kind of coming on and sharing your collective expertise. It is Brain Injury Awareness Month, and certainly one question we get very often from folks is, how can I increase awareness and understanding? What can I do to make a difference? And so we thought it would be a helpful discussion to have you guys come on, because you've all come at this from different experiences, not only geography, but kind of different experiences from the injury, how long ago, kind of what the rehabilitation and recovery process was like. So it would be interesting for you guys to share a little bit about, how did you get started when you decided you wanted to try to increase the awareness and understanding? How did you start? That feels very overwhelming. We'll switch the order. We'll start with Carol first.
I remember early on, like looking at people who were like, where I am now, 20 something years, and just being overwhelmed. Like, how in the world do people do all of these things? People like have written books or giving speeches or are out there talking to Congress. But the reality is we all start small. As none of us kind of spring fully formed as advocates. For me, it was, maybe roughly 4 years-ish post-injury, because my early years, like for many of us, they were awful. They were about learning how to live as a brain injury survivor, how to manage my injury. But then there was an issue going on in Maine where they were threatening to take away services from brain injury survivors. And they were forming groups to go to the Capitol to protest. But at that point, I didn't have the brain power to go to the Capitol. So it's like, well, what can I do? I wrote a letter to the governor. And that was the very beginning of my advocacy journey. I did little things. I got involved with doing presentations, like with somebody's help, at the brain injury conference. I gave very small speeches. I mean, my first speech was like all of 5 minutes long. And I mean, I was really glad there was a podium in front of me so nobody could see that. I mean, my knees were shaking and I was like, hanging on to that podium for dear life because I was so scared. But I knew that it's what I wanted to do. So I think that starting small, that starting with a post on social media, that starting with telling your story to a neighbor, that's all advocacy. Every little thing that we do that gets our stories out there, that helps people understand more about brain injury, that we don't have to do these big things like all at once, that the journey is very tiny steps. And what I know now at this stage is those tiny steps can add up to a lot.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's go to Paul.
For me, after I had my concussion that changed my life on September 11, 2007, I ran into a huge learning curve. Anxiety, depression, call it what you will. Everything was on board. And I didn't want to do anymore. I just gave up. But I started to show up to some of these small groups, and I started gleaning information here and there. And I didn't really listen to those that were complaining because I already was complaining. I was trying to listen to who's doing something about this, who's actively trying. We don't know everything we need to know about brain injury. That's kind of obvious, kind of from the comments, kind of from social media. They come from everywhere. But what can I do to get this computer back up and running? I used to be in tech. And it was through real simple, basic steps that I found my advocacy, my awareness was because I was learning. Maybe I can share with somebody else and they can learn too. And the biggest thing was to accept what I had after my injury, and Carol touched on it, another member touched on it the last video. Accept what I have and work from there. You have a house that's been decimated by a tornado. What can I do to get the house back into shape? So that's where I started, and I've been hooked ever since.
Thank you. Let's go to Kelly.
So my story is a little different. I think I started advocating when my daughter was in the hospital in the PICU. I didn't, this is back in 2001. A lot of people didn't know brain injury. I didn't know brain injury. I didn't know anyone who had a brain injury. So starting to educate myself and asking questions of the doctors, what exactly is this? What's her prognosis? And learning that every brain injury is different. You've seen one. And that started it. And then my first public speaking was working with the hospital we were at and going and doing EMT refresher courses and telling my story. And as a thank you to them that, what you do matters, what you do is important. And then just taking those little, baby steps of, then advocating with other groups and getting more involved. It was my way to give back. And it was also my way to find a niche for me that I could work with, after my injury, because my daughter's injury came first in my mind, and then my recovery came after hers. So I was advocating all along, but just learning more about both of them because they were very different.
Mm-hmm. And Darcy.
I think, like Kelly, mine started small. When I was injured, I come from a very small rural community, and my dad's idea of brain injury was that I would be in a vegetative state for the rest of my life. So from a small community perspective that hadn't had that much exposure to brain injury, first it was educating my family, which I think a lot of folks out there, their family members don't know what brain injury is about. Then from my brain injury, from my family, it spread through my community, and I got some publicity from that, just educating my fellow community members as to what it's like to experience a brain injury. Then when I moved away and became more of a career person, I then joined a support group, which actually in a rural community, there wasn't a support group. So when there was one, I joined that and helped educate other families as to what it's like to experience a brain injury, because unfortunately, their individual that they're caring for may not be able to express it as much. So I then went and helped with a support group, and that again led to additional opportunities to share.
All right, I'm going to ask an off-the-cuff question. We've had a few comments about this, and I get this a lot when answering calls on the 800 line. For families that are struggling to understand the injury, we get this a lot, right? The families think, right, either you're never going to get better, or you should be fine. What's your problem, right? There's two extremes. So do you find it's helpful to have somebody else besides the person with the injury give that message to the family? I'll say that my experience has been when the person with the injury tries to share information with the family, it's instantly discounted. What do you know? You're not an expert. But if they hear it from other family members or other people with brain injury who might be further down the road of recovery, that holds weight. That, to me, this has been my experience, that gets at least the attention of the family. It doesn't necessarily magically change their beliefs or their perceptions, but it at least gets them to listen to the information. I'm just wondering if that has been an experience you guys have seen as well in your work talking to others. I'll ask Kelly first. I know Kelly's done a lot.
Okay. Yes, I think that educating the family, Darcy brought up a great point, is key. Again, people don't understand. They either look at actually all of us sitting here. We all we don't look like we had a brain injury. We all look like your average person, and so people just assume that we're okay, or that if we just work harder and try harder, we'll get better. And it's not like that. And it's trying to explain that, don't judge a book.
Yeah. Oh, she might have lost her internet for a second there. I'll jump over to Paul.
I just got a text this morning from an aunt of a nephew they're raising money this weekend for his care. And she's so angry and she's so mad, but because she understands it. The mom and pop, they don't understand it. She got it for some reason. And I get calls from folks like that, and I'm like, don't give me to the person that doesn't understand. I'm so sorry.
It's another message coming in.
When you volunteer, the phone happens.
Yeah.
Sorry. But getting that person on the outside to understand is very key. And sometimes that's not easy. And the matter of fact is we're going to advocate for ourselves first, because we feel brain injury. It's all internal. You can't see it. Yeah. And so I don't know if there's any magic bullet for it per se, but patience and understanding, and just taking time to sit down with a conference like this and bite off a little bit at a time. It's not going to come overnight, but yes, there is validation to brain injury, and we are obviously enforcing that incarnate by grouping together, and that group is enlarging.
Excellent. Thanks. And Carol?
Thinking about, I think I might be frozen.
We can still hear you.
Think about my own experience. A couple of things stand out. That when learning how to be vulnerable with my injury was something that I needed to learn how to do with my family. That I could tell them about things, and they probably wouldn't, maybe didn't believe me, but when they actually saw how the brain injury was affecting me, then their eyes were open. Because in the early years, I tried to hide a lot. I would tell them, but they didn't necessarily see it. When they saw firsthand how things affected me, one of the vignettes that comes to mind is I used to have Sunday dinner often with my parents, and so they would cancel, I would cancel. Not a big deal, but then one time my parents had to cancel, and I lost it, like completely, like big time, lost it, sobbing, angry, the whole 9 yards. My mother got angry at me, and what she didn't understand was I was counting on that meal. Because at the time I was eating cottage cheese most of the time, because I couldn't figure out how to cook. And that was a beginning for my family in understanding my brain injury, that how much trouble I was having with things, because they thought I was doing just fine when I wasn't doing just fine. And I had to have that kind of blow up in order for them to see my brain injury.
It became real to them, right? So then they, oh, you really mean it when you say these things. Yeah. Yeah.
So Greg,
Welcome back, Darcy.
So Greg, to your point about other people becoming involved in explaining brain injury rather than the person who's experienced a brain injury, I have found that has been a lot of very positive information. Like, for example, all of us, we have had brain injuries, but maybe, and for our advocacy, we help explain to families a little bit more about brain injury. I've gotten several referrals where the family members have contacted the association's reached out to me, and I have called and talked to these families to explain a little bit about brain injury, or again on social media to explain, yes, this is what I believe that they're going through, they're experiencing, and this is how you can help. So I think coming from a person who's experienced a brain injury, we have a unique aspect that we can help others, the family members and other folks understand what it's like and be able to articulate that. And, or like Carol was saying, just show them what it's like to have the brain injury.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Very getting that validating info, right? Some realistic, I guess, information, for lack of a better term, right? From somebody who's lived it, can be very powerful and helpful for both the person with the injury and the family to understand that, one, they're not alone, right? And two, okay, all right, we can start to wrap our heads around it. All right, so that kind of leads into the second. My apologies for getting a little off topic, but that kind of leads into the second question, which was more of what some tips or advice that you might offer somebody looking to kind of increase awareness and understanding in their own community. So how does what's the thing you would tell them to start with? The thing to do or not do? We'll start with Paul.
Seek a support group or church that you can connect with. It won't be the first one. It might be the second one. You might have to create a support group, which I did in my community, and lean into it. By lean into it, I mean put the information out there, and just keep putting the information out there, because the rote or the norm is to say you're supposed to just get over this, stop talking, and that's not the case. The case is it's more prevalent than we imagine, and pick the person that you want to tell about your brain injury. Don't necessarily tell everybody, because I sure did for the first 3 years, and found this group. And I found this group. This group is very important to me because it allows me the opportunity to not only get better, but to grow inside of the advocacy that I've chosen to take on myself. If that makes any sense, it's a choice, but make sure you lean into it, because there's going to be people that brain what? I don't understand. That happens all the time when I ask to have our meeting at a church. Brain, I'm sorry, what did you just say? So lean into it, be patient with it, be deliberate with it, and keep going.
Okay. Kelly.
I would say, to be honest, I mean, for a long time, I didn't talk about mine. I just didn't feel like talking about it, but I would talk about my daughters. And then I realized, you know what, I have to teach her that she shouldn't be ashamed. I mean, it's something that happened to her. It's not something she did. And realize that I need to do that for myself. And again, starting out small, like, support groups are great. Talking to a small group of people, trying to, and I agree with Paul, sometimes you go in and it's just a complaint, but try to talk about different strategies they use. Try to talk about, come together and try those different strategies. They're not all going to work. And you have to really, it's a give and take. And finally, you're going to find even that one little one that works for you. But you have to be persistent and and just keep going at it. Each day there's a little bit more, and you're going to have your days where are not good days. And that's okay. Everyone has those, brain injury or not.
Very true. Darcy.
I think I agree with what Paul and Kelly are saying. And sometimes, like coming from a rural community, there was no support group. So what do you do next? And fortunately, through the internet, we now have a lot of virtual support groups. So I'd encourage join a virtual support group, or maybe a state association would have a list of support groups that you can join on there virtually also. I would also encourage Facebook groups. That's a good outlet to connect with others, to explain like what you're going through, get tips and tricks from some of those folks as well. So Facebook groups or social media are very important to connect with other survivors.
Excellent ideas. And Carol.
I think in addition to what everybody has said, I think part of advocacy is learning how to tell our stories. That we all have long brain injury stories from the beginning that we were injured, from everything that we've gone through. But when we're advocating, we don't necessarily need to tell the story from beginning to wherever we are in the journey right now. Usually we only need to tell a little bit of it, depending on who our audience is. So I think advocacy is learning to tell, well, what part of my story do I tell? How much do I share with somebody? How much do I disclose about my brain injury? What's most helpful for the person that I'm talking to hear? Because advocacy is less about us and it's more about the other person, more about sharing what we've been through for the purpose of educating somebody else. I think a lot of us, we go through that stage of, we tell our story because we need to tell it for ourselves, because we are trying to make sense of what's happened to us. How has my life changed? What am I going to do? Then advocacy is using our story to help other people. And there is a switch that happens there. So I think that learning how to use our stories is a part of being an advocate.
That's a really good point. It would seem like all of you have talked about the importance of having some type of support network in some way, shape, or form, that the advocacy and doing awareness doesn't happen. You don't have to be out in the wilderness doing it on your own. Like find your people, right? Find your people that can support you, that you can learn from, that maybe you can teach a few things to, and see where the opportunities are kind of in your own backyard, right? What, as Paul said, he started a support group because there wasn't one. Darcy was looking for something and it was hard to find in a rural area, right? So she had to go, look outside of where she would typically look to find that support. So it's been interesting. Each of you have come at this from a very different experience, both geographic and type of injury, but you've all had the similar idea of trying to get that support to help you as you begin. So if I think also the other question we get is more existential. Why should I be doing this? Like it's hard to see the outcome of the effort sometimes. So I guess the question, why do you think that awareness, working to increase awareness about brain injury is helpful or worth it? I'm going to ask Carol first.
I think this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not. You don't get to you tell one story. You get one outcome. It is something that builds over time. And for me, I think the reason that I do this, the reason I think it's important is, brain injury was a pivotal moment in my life. I mean, I can date everything in my life to pre-brain injury and post-brain injury because everything changed for me in that moment. And I want to use what I've been through to make a difference. I want to say, well, can there be some purpose? Can there be some value? Not that I ever would want to wish brain injury on myself or anybody else. I wish it never happened, but it did. So now what do I do with it? how can I use what I've been through? How can I use this experience to help others, to make the journey easier for other people too? And so that's why I think for me that this is an important journey, that when I was new at this, there were long-term survivors who helped me along the path. So now that I'm a long-term survivor, it's a privilege for me to be able to help other people along the path and to continue to advance the cause.
Excellent. Kelly.
Jumping on like what Carol said is one, I believe that every time you talk to someone, you're learning something new yourself, and you're also educating them. You know, my big thing was always education. No one really knew about brain injury, so I kind of felt like it was my job to teach them what it is, you know, what you can do, what are the effects of it. And I'm not going to change people's mind the first time, and I might not even change their mind after the 100th time, but if I can touch one person, that I've done a really good job. And that's how I go into it.
Okay. And Darcy?
I think one of the reasons why I have been so passionate about advocacy is the misconception about brain injury, but how I was treated after I shared with someone I had a brain injury. I have received all sorts of looks, like their eyes have gotten so wide when I told them I had a brain injury and they didn't quite understand what it was, or just people being condescending, thinking I wouldn't understand something because of my brain injury. They're just how people have treated me since they've learned I've had a brain injury. That is what fuels my passion to share with others what it's like to understand brain injury, and to how to treat people that have had a brain injury, because again, we didn't ask for this, but we may have deficits. I say that it's like we're in the same ocean, running the same storm, but we're in different boats. So one boat may be different than the other, and it's explaining how that boat is a little different and how we experience a little different. So that way the survivor won't be treated differently. We still have dignity. We're still human. There's a lot of things to us that we're just changed a little bit, possibly. So that was my feel, was not being treated differently or in a condescending way.
Okay. Yeah, so each of you kind of touched on this, the importance of knowing that efforts to increase awareness and understanding, you don't always see the results of the effort, right? And we know that every effort is not productive, right? You may not be able to change the minds or perceptions of somebody by sharing your story or information, or other folks. It's just not there yet. And that it's a marathon, right? As Carol said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. That this is, the awareness is an ongoing issue. It's never ending, as far as kind of ensuring people understand and are aware about kind of what brain injury is, what it can do, what it might look like. We've come a long way since, each of you are all injured a while ago. And I think about what the understanding was then versus it is now, we certainly have come a long way. Still a long way to go. But I'm looking at some of the comments and the questions that have come in. A lot of folks have thanked us for kind of coming on and sharing your story, as well as kind of validating, reinforcing the importance of getting support in whatever way, shape, or form. So if people have come up with questions after, they're more than welcome to contact us at the Brain Injury Association of America through our 800 line or through email. Can certainly work to connect you with information and support in your area. We'd encourage people to go and take a look at the Brain Injury Association of America's Challenge newsletter, which is on the BIAA website, and to check out also the Brain Injury Association of America's YouTube page, which is where our videos are. We've done some what I thought were some really helpful practical videos expanded on the issue of the challenge. if folks do you have any kind of parting advice or comments that you'd like to share? Any last words of advice that you like to have on? We'll start with Carol. We lost Paul, so I think Paul lost his another computer or something. I mean, that happens. So, but
I think believing in ourselves, believing that we as brain injury survivors can make a difference, believing that it can get better from wherever you are right now, is important to know. Even if it seems like it's awful right now, it can get better. Life may never be the same, but it can get better. And that there are, that being an advocate can be a way to find meaning again after brain injury.
Excellent. Kelly.
I think that everyone has a story. Everyone can use their story to help others and to help themselves. And whether you're brain injured or not. And I think we learn, like Carol said before, you take pieces of that story, whatever works for that appropriate time, and you use it to teach people what it's like.
Excellent. Darcy?
I think Kelly and Carol have covered it well in the advocacy piece. And I would just like to encourage others that keep trying and celebrate every little success. If you are working towards something, or if you just see an improvement, whether it be your stamina, whether it be reading, whatever challenge you're facing right now, and you see some improvement, celebrate that success, because you are on the right path, and keep trying your best, and celebrate that, because it is a difficult thing to do, this journey, but celebrate the success and keep at it.
That's a really good point.
Well
That's
said.
a nice point to end on. Well, thank you all for kind of coming, sharing your collective wisdom and expertise today. Thank you all for coming and participating. Again, you can always email or call if you have more questions. This will be recorded. It will also be available on the BIAA website, as well as the YouTube page. You'll be able to check it out there as well. So thank you all for coming today.